Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I make my sourdough bread. All right, so the first thing that you're going to need is a bowl, a scale, and it can be any type of food scale. It doesn't have to be an expensive one. Your sourdough starter, which I have right here. It's nice and bubbly and ready to go. I just like to stir it up a little bit before I use it. You're also going to need salt and flour and water. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing the float test. I've read several different places that the float test can be accurate or it's not. I still do the float test and I like it, but you do you. So the point of the float test is to have a glass of water or a jar, and if your sourdough starter floats in the jar or floats in the water, then it's ready to go. As you can see, mine was ready, so we're going to use it. Right now I'm tearing the food scale because it's better to measure or to weigh out your ingredients than use like cups and stuff like that. So I'm weighing out my sourdough. And to store it, I just use this little, it's actually a lap sponge, but you can just use a cheesecloth. In a separate bowl, I like to weigh out my water and salt. That way, if I add too much to the sourdough starter, I'm not ruining it. So I put in the water. Now I'm just adding the salt. And then I just put that aside for a little bit. Next, I'm going to add the flour to the bowl with the sourdough starter in it. I like to weigh my starter first just so I know how many loaves I can make. I usually make multiple loaves at a time. So I like to see how much starter I have, and then that will help me determine how many loaves that I can make. So now you can see I'm just dumping in the flour. I tared the food scale again back to 0. I'm using grams, and I'm just dumping in the flour to the correct amount that I need. And I just use all-purpose. It works fine for me. All right, now that everything is weighed out, I just push my scale aside. And now I'm going to combine the water and salt mixture into the sourdough and flour mixture. And I like to swirl the bowl a little bit, the bowl with the water and the salt. I like to swirl that a little bit at the end because the salt tends to be at the bottom of the bowl. Helps get all the salt into the dough. Next, I have this fancy little spatula. You do not need this for just used a spoon or even just my hand, honestly. I just, from watching YouTube videos, found this fancy spatula. I don't even know what it's called, but I was walking around Ace Hardware one day and I saw it and I grabbed it. So I use this. I like to use this when I'm mixing in the initial stage of mixing up the flour. That way I don't have flour, I don't know, it just seems less messy. And then later on I will switch to using my hand to finish the process. And you just want to stir everything until it's combined pretty well. Now you can see I am scraping the dough off the spatula. I like to use the hand that I'm going to be mixing the dough with to get the dough off the spatula. That way I only have one hand that is dirty. But I don't always remember. This time I did. Now I'm just mixing the dough by hand. And at this point, it's just easier. The dough is thicker now, so I just find it easier to use my hand instead of that little spatula thingy that I had. All right, now I'm just getting the dough off my fingers. It looks pretty well mixed. And so I'm just scraping as much dough as I can off my fingers, putting it back into the bowl. And then I'm going to cover it with a towel and just leave it on the counter. So now this is after the first little bit. I think it's an hour and a half, but I don't remember. Anyway, you want to fold the dough. So you basically just divide it in 4s in your head, take a corner and pull it from you towards you, hopefully that makes sense. So I'm turning the bowl, I'm reaching across from me, I'm grabbing a piece, kind of pulling it some, and then pulling it down towards me. And you want to do that 4 times. Then you just put the towel back on and let it rest for another period of time. You want to do this a total of 3 times, so this is the 3rd time. You can see the dough is coming together pretty well. You just do the same stretch and fold. Just stretch it up, fold it towards you. Then I'm just going to put the towel back on and let it rest for some more time. Now that the dough is rested, now it's time to make your loaves. So what I'm going to do is put some flour on the counter just so my dough doesn't stick. You also will need, well, if you're making multiple loaves like I am in this video, you will need your food scale back to weigh out the loaves. And I just put a little flour on the food scale just so my dough doesn't stick. If you're just making one loaf, you do not need the food scale. But I find it easier to make multiple loaves at one time. It takes the same amount of time, and then I just store the other ones in the freezer or give them away to friends. So what I'm doing now is I'm just scraping the dough from the bowl, and then I'm going to dump the dough onto the floured countertop. Hey, Rams. And just by going around and kind of detaching the dough from the bowl, it just makes it easier to come out. You can see pretty much the bowl is clean. Now what I'm going to do at this point is just put a little flour on the top just so it doesn't stick. Then fold the dough over just to mix it a little bit. Now I'm going to weigh the dough to see how much that whole dough weighs. And then I'm going to divide it by 3 since I'm making 3 loaves in this video. I use a bench scraper here. It works really well. You can also use a knife. And I'm just dividing the loaves into 3. And just making sure that they weigh roughly the same amount. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I try to get it close. Okay, just double checking to make sure they all weigh about the same. Got to take a little bit from that one, and we should be good to go. Now I'm forming the loaves. So I just kind of pull it apart to I just stretch the dough to kind of make a square, and then I put 4 corners into the center. And then I turn it over with my hands. I just kind of shape it into a ball. And this just takes practice. As you can see, I use these cheap plastic bowls I got from Target and some towels as my, I think they're called bantams or something. I don't know what they're called. But anyway, I don't have the normal sourdough bowls. I just use these little cheap bowls from Target and these blue towels. And you can sprinkle them with flour if you find that they stick. Mine don't, so I don't sprinkle them with flour. After you form the balls into a loaf and you put them in these things, in these little bowls, you want to have the seam side or the bottom part up. So as you can see with this one, see that I'm pulling in the corners, and then I'm going to turn it over and shape it into a round ball. I'm just adding flour so it doesn't stick. Then I'm going to take that ball, I'm going to turn it upside down into the bowl, and then I will cover it with the blue towel. And then I just pull the corners in. So those are going to rest in the fridge overnight. So the next day, I am setting the oven to 450. And I'm just going to let that preheat while I get my sourdough loaves ready. There's Oliver. All right, so this is what I use to cook my sourdough in. I have a Dutch oven, and I noticed that you use that little trivet thing or whatever that thing is called, and the bottoms don't burn. So I just put that in there, and then I put the lid on, and I put that whole thing in the oven and just let it preheat as well. Now, while the oven is heating up, I take my little dough ball and I take it out of the blue towel. And I take the seam side that was up in the bowl, I put that down on some parchment paper, and then I use my little scoring tool to make some, to make decorative designs or whatever. I just do like a little wheat pattern. It's what I've been doing for a little while and just trying to, I don't know, I just do something easy. You do not need this tool. A knife works perfectly fine. I just happened to buy one day and now I have it, but I used a knife for a very long time. And you can go online and find all sorts of designs if you want to do that, or just make a couple lines. Doesn't have to be decorative. I just wanted to have some fun with this little like wheat type pattern. But as long as there's like slits in your dough for the air to escape, you are good. Doesn't matter what it looks like. So now the Dutch oven is ready to go. My oven is preheated to 450. So now I'm going to put that loaf right into the Dutch oven. So I take the lid off. As you can see, it gets steamy in there. I find that transporting the dough on parchment paper works very well. So that's what I do. And then you just want to pop it in there, put the lid back on, and then leave it in your oven for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, then you want to take the lid off. So that's what I'm doing here. And as you can see, it has risen pretty well. And now with the lid off, it's going to brown up and give it a nice crunchy texture. And that's for about 25 minutes. 25 minutes is up and the bread is ready to come out. And there's the finished product. Nice and golden brown. And just a side note, those oven gloves are amazing. So if you can get some, I got them on Amazon. They're like $10 or something. There's a whole bunch of different designs. I got some skeleton ones for work. They are awesome. So highly recommend those. After I pull the bread out of the oven, I just lift up the parchment paper and then I put the bread on that little cooling rack to let it cool for a little bit. It's a nice golden brown. My pattern design kind of fell apart, but it's fine. So now it's time to slice the bread. And I like to use a bread knife because this bread is a little challenging to cut into because of that nice crispy crust. So just be careful. So here's the inside of the bread. As you can see, it's still warm. You can see the steam. I think that's a great breadcrumb. I don't like the holes in the bread too big. So to me, that is perfect. I'm just going to add some butter and I'm going to enjoy the bread. There you go, finished product. And it's delicious. Thanks for watching this video on how I make sourdough bread. Stay tuned for the next video. Bye.